we're going to tell you about durability when it comes to building your army. This is to keep you from getting completely wiped off the board on your first turn.
One of the biggest frustrations I think that Warhammer players have is playing a game where you just eradicate on the first turn and you're like, I didn't even need to be here. Or alternatively, when you hit your opponent so hard that they're like, I don't want to play against you. And the factor that is affecting this is nothing to do with the game itself. The game covers for this, but it's durability. And most players don't design armies that are focused around this element. Most people are too busy thinking about their cool combos or hitting your opponent really hard. They never think about what happens when they get punched in the face. Now, there are two different ways to build durability into your army. And I typically like to have about 60 to 70% of my army have durability.
Wow, okay.
So it's a significant number. Now, if you remember from a previous video we spoke about Alpha Strike, you'll know that 40% of my army is typically Alpha Strike. So how then can 70% of it be durability? That's typically because I will keep some of my Alpha Strike in a durable situation, so I've got some Alpha Strike left in case my opponent hits me hard, right?
Yeah.
So a good example was in the Alpha Strike video, I spoke about my drop pod. My drop pod gives me durability because I'm not on the board. And that's one way to be durable, is to just not be there. Now, the option to teleport in later on in the game is definitely a factor for durability, and you do want to make sure that your units can stay safe. But another way of doing it is to have high toughness. Most guns in the game struggle with anything that's toughness 8 or higher because strength 4 is kind of the standard in the game, which means you're only wounding on 6s, which essentially means you're not wounded.
Yeah.
And so a great tactic would be if all of my miniatures were inside vehicles that had toughness 8, that's going to really upset my opponent. As on the first turn of the game, all of his strength 4 weapons are essentially not on the board. It's another way of ruining my opponent's chance to do anything, right?
Yeah.
So you can think about it, why do we do an Alpha Strike? We do an Alpha Strike to hit them so hard that their army isn't as effective. Also, if my durability is so tough that my opponent can't hit me, their army is also not very effective.
That's so crazy because you hear so many people say it's all offense, it's all offense. And I mean, you're saying, no, actually the majority of it's defense with a really hard offense.
Right, exactly. You've got to have this, but most people just don't build it. I see so many people that buy like the basic box set, and the basic box set is a ton of miniatures, but they're all toughness 4 models on the Space Marine side. The very first thing I did when I got my 9th edition starter set was buy repulsors and slapped all my men inside repulsors.
Yeah.
Now they've got fast movement at toughness 8. At the start of the game, my opponent looks at an army of toughness 8 things, and all their little pistols are kind of irrelevant against me, right? So that's a very strong factor that you want to consider, is how can I stop my opponent from being able to hurt me? So toughness is one way of going it, and toughness is one of the better stats. A lot of people rely on high armor saves, but high armor is going to get removed by armor penetration. Then people rely on invulnerable saves. Invulnerable saves are great, but still, they're typically only 50-50. So that's only saving you half the time. If you have a choice between a 50-50 chance of surviving or I'm only wounded on 6s, actually only wounded on 6s is a much more secure
I like
place
those
to be.
odds.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I like those odds.
So you really want to see how often can I hunker down in toughness 8 or toughness 7 things. And even toughness 6 can get really annoying. Actually, talking about high toughness, in a game where the average strength is strength 4, even toughness 5 can be really annoying. Like Death Guard are naturally durable. You add disgustingly resilient, they're even more durable.
Yeah.
But one of the factors that people don't consider is there is another thing that is even better than toughness, even better than saving throws, and even better than not being there at all. You know what that is?
What is it?
Ablative wounds. So I'll explain what this is. When I have a Space Marine squad or a Chaos Space Marine squad, you've essentially got 4 guys with bolt guns and 1 guy with a heavy weapon.
Okay.
I don't think of them as 5 models. I think of them as 1 heavy weapon with 8 additional wounds.
Nice.
And when you think of it like this,
Yeah.
suddenly your las cannon isn't scary, because you might have 1 strength 9 shot that does d6 wounds, but you can only kill 1 dude. So you took out 2 of my ablative wounds, and the rest of the damage you did is irrelevant because there's 3 other guys before you even touch my heavy weapon.
Oh my god.
So
Yes.
a common strategy that I used to play is I would just play basic troops, put a heavy weapon in every single troop squad, and then just move the heavy weapons around the board as I wanted, allowing the extra Space Marines to be the ablative
That's
wounds.
so good, yeah.
Yeah, you
That's
can
really good.
You can get really smart with this, and Astra Militarum are another great example of this. Really cheap units, really cheap heavy weapons, which is essentially 8 ablative wounds for your heavy weapons.
Yeah, that's so good.
Right,
Oh my god.
and it just changes the way you think about the game. Suddenly, taking a lot of infantry is a form of durability. So I remember playing against one of my friends, and this was actually right at the very beginning of Knights of the Game table when we were building it. We were playing at home and we were theorizing like what kind of things we were going to do. And I was explaining to him this concept. And I showed him, I was like, we can play a game, and I think I can guarantee a victory against you just because I'm bringing Poxwalkers. And so he was like, wait a minute. I was like, I'm just going to, because Poxwalkers are a troop for Death Guard, but there's some key elements for Poxwalkers. And the biggest one is they don't fail morale. They can't because they're zombies. Also, they're troops, so you can take a lot of them. And if you've ever, I don't know if you know this, but I have like 200 Poxwalkers. And the reason is I would max out units of 20 Poxwalkers and have like 10 units across multiple attachments. And then I would just walk up to objectives on the board and sit on them. Well, my opponent had a lot of high-powered weaponry. He had melter guns and las cannons and all these powerful guns, but they only fire once. So yes, your melter gun will kill my 1 Poxwalker, but there are 19 left in that unit, and they're sitting on the objective. Oh, what's that? Your Space Marines only come in squads of 5, so you can't contest any objective.
Yeah.
So I slowly walked around the board and stood on all 6 objectives and won. because I secured every objective every turn, and he didn't have the firepower to get rid of them.
Yeah.
When he charged them in combat, all I did was had a couple of psychic guys stand near them, and now they're pumping out mortal wounds, and they're getting to reroll disgustingly resilient saves. And, fun fact, I would surround my characters with more poxwalkers. So my characters couldn't be targeted because they're surrounded by poxwalkers. You couldn't even charge them because they're surrounded by poxwalkers. You have to charge the poxwalkers, which aren't dying. Oh, and every time a poxwalker kills you in close combat, I get another poxwalker. And so the point is, another method of durability is to just have lots and lots of infantry, more than your opponent has shots. If my opponent has 30 high-powered guns and I have 300 infantry, there aren't 10 turns in the game.
There's nothing they can do.
Nothing they can do. So another form of durability is to just take very large squads and lots of them and just drown your opponent.
That's the power of the hive then. Like that's the
Exactly.
power of the horde and the hive is really you're just taking objectives. It's not about complete obliteration.
Right, yeah, if I take a squad of Tyranid Termagants, 30 of them sitting on an objective is going to completely nullify your ability to take that objective off me because they're troops. And if I've got hive mind nearby, they don't take morale checks. So I'm just going to control that objective. And if your opponent doesn't have enough firepower, probability-wise, they're just not going to kill them.
Yeah.
Which brings us into the next video where we talk about probability. You need to be able to deal with all situations. Like, yes, your high-powered guns might kill big vehicles if somebody brings a Titan, but what if they don't? What if they do just bring a lot of Termagants? In fact, one of the early videos in Knights of the Game Table, one of our opponents would regularly bring 150 Gretchen in his Orc army, and you just couldn't take objectives off him. He had too many Orcs, essentially Orc models, Gretchen models, sitting on the objectives, and most of us just didn't have the firepower to remove them. And he won game after game on the channel playing that. We did like a winner stays on, and we had to change the format because this one army, none of us had the firepower to remove it because they were just so cheap. So durability,
so funny.
yeah, it can
It's
often
so funny.
come by just having lots and lots of models. So when you build your army, just think about 70% of your army needs to be survivable. So when your opponent hits you, yes, you might lose 30%, but you're going to retain a large chunk of it, and specifically some elements of your Alpha Strike or your counter Alpha Strike if you're going to bring like a deep striking sort of Terminators that you know on turn 2 who are going to hit really hard. So that brings us nicely into probability, which is what is the actual probability of me being able to do what it is that I'm trying to do. And we're going to talk about that in the next video in the series. If you enjoyed the tactics that we share and you maybe want to see them fine-tuned for each individual army and some of the sub-armies, or maybe you just want to learn how to paint faster using something we call sketch style, which was taught to us by some professional painters, multi-Golden Demon Award winners that we hired to teach all of our members how to do it, and maybe you want to support the show and even get discounts on miniatures, then you might want to consider becoming a member of Knights at the Game Table. Now, there's a link somewhere outside of here. You can click on it and go and look at all the benefits that you get. You also get some cool little gifts as well, a little goodie bag that we send you for anybody that signs up. So we'd love to have you as a member, and it's only because of people like you that become members that we're able to create content like this to share with you. So consider doing that, and look somewhere outside this video for the link that takes you through to watch the next video where we talk about probability and how that's a huge factor on you being able to do anything in the game.